Claire, why didn't you disclose your criminal record? The recruiter's voice was calm, almost apologetic, but the words hit me so hard I forgot how to breathe for a second. I stared across the desk at the woman sitting in front of me, her hands folded neatly on top of a yellow legal pad. Just 30 seconds earlier, she had been smiling at me, complimenting my resume, talking about onboarding and training schedules. I had already started imagining myself working there. A real office again. A paycheck that would finally let me stop checking my bank account before buying groceries. Then suddenly, everything changed. I'm sorry, I asked quietly. She hesitated. I could tell she regretted saying it out loud. Your mother contacted our HR department this morning, she said carefully. She said there were things in your past we should know before making a hiring decision. My fingers tightened around the strap of my purse. What things? The recruiter looked uncomfortable now. She claimed you were arrested several years ago and that you've struggled with emotional instability. The room went completely silent. I could hear the faint hum of fluorescent lights above us. Somewhere down the hall, a printer started running. But inside my head, everything felt numb and distant. I've never been arrested, I whispered. The woman nodded slowly, like she believed me. I figured there might be some misunderstanding, she said. But legally, once concerns like that are brought to our attention, we have to be cautious. Cautious. That word stayed in my head the entire drive home. I drove 15 miles through freezing February rain with the windshield wipers squeaking every few seconds because I still hadn't replaced them. My heater barely worked. The gas tank was almost empty. And all I could think was that this had happened before. Not exactly like this, but enough times that something inside me suddenly snapped into place. Every interview had started the same way over the last 3 years. They liked me. Sometimes they loved me. I'd leave feeling hopeful for the first time in months. Then nothing. Emails stopped. Calls stopped. Or I'd get a polite rejection that made no sense at all. We've decided to move in another direction. After further consideration, we don't feel you're the right fit. I blamed myself every single time. I thought maybe my gap in employment looked suspicious. Maybe I sounded nervous in interviews. Maybe I wasn't confident enough. My mother certainly thought so. You always undersell yourself, Claire, Diane Bennett liked to say while standing in my tiny kitchen criticizing the groceries I bought. No employer wants someone who lacks confidence. She said it with concern in her voice. Like she was helping me. Like she always was. By the time I pulled into my apartment complex, my hands were shaking so badly, I dropped my keys twice trying to unlock the door. My apartment smelled faintly like burnt coffee and old carpet. I kicked off my wet shoes and sat down on the edge of my couch without turning on the lights. Outside the window, snow mixed with rain under the orange glow of the parking lot lamps. I stared at the wall for a long time before finally opening my laptop. One by one, I started scrolling through old rejection emails. Hundreds of them. Marketing assistant, office coordinator, receptionist, administrative support. Even a receptionist position at a dentist's office had rejected me after 2 interviews and a background check. Background check. My stomach twisted. Suddenly, I remembered something else. 2 months earlier, I had interviewed for a position at a nonprofit downtown. The hiring manager had seemed excited about me. She even walked me around the office, introducing me to people. Then right before I left, she asked an odd question. Do you have family nearby? At the time, I thought she was just making conversation. When I told her my parents lived 20 minutes away, her expression changed for half a second, just enough for me to notice. Then the rejection came the next morning. I grabbed my phone and opened my call history. My mother called me almost every day, sometimes twice. If I didn't answer, she'd leave messages pretending to sound cheerful. Just checking on my girl. Call me back when you can. Your father and I worry about you. Worry. That word suddenly felt ugly. My chest tightened as another memory surfaced. Last Thanksgiving, I'd mentioned possibly moving to Chicago if I found work there. My father had gone quiet during dinner. My mother dropped her fork onto her plate so hard the sound made me jump. Why would you move all the way there? She asked immediately. There's nothing for you in Chicago. I laughed awkwardly. Jobs maybe. You can find jobs here, she said sharply. People who leave family behind usually regret it. At the time, I thought she was just emotional. Mothers get emotional. That's what I told myself. But now, sitting alone in my dim apartment with rejection emails glowing across my screen, something cold started spreading through me. Not anger yet. Something worse. Recognition. I suddenly thought about how every major decision in my life somehow collapsed right before it happened. College opportunities disappeared mysteriously. Friendships faded after strange misunderstandings. Relationships ended after my mother accidentally said the wrong thing at the wrong time. Even my ex-boyfriend Nathan once asked me a question that confused me for months afterward. Why does your mom keep implying you're mentally unstable? I told him he misunderstood her. I defended her immediately. That's what I always did. Because Diane Bennett never yelled. She never threatened. She smiled. She cooked soup when I got sick. She folded my laundry when she visited. She called me sweetheart while quietly dismantling my confidence piece by piece. My phone suddenly buzzed in my hand, making me jump. Mom calling. I stared at the screen while it vibrated over and over again. Then voicemail picked up. A few seconds later, her voice filled the apartment softly. Hi, honey. Just wanted to check how the interview went today. Your father and I are praying for good news. Call me back, sweetheart. I listened to the message twice, then 3 times. By the 4th time, I noticed something I'd never heard before. Relief. Very small, very buried, but it was there. Like she already knew I didn't get the job. I did not call my mother back that night. For the first time in my life, I let her voicemail sit there unanswered while I stared at the ceiling of my apartment and tried to understand what was happening to me. Outside, the freezing rain had turned to snow. Thin white flakes drifted past the streetlights in slow motion, coating the parking lot in a layer of ice that would make tomorrow morning miserable for everyone trying to get to work. Work. The word itself felt cruel now. I had spent the last 3 years chasing jobs that always slipped away at the last second, and suddenly I could not stop asking myself one terrifying question. What if none of it had been my fault? I barely slept. Around 3 in the morning, I got up and opened my laptop again. My tiny apartment felt colder than usual, even with the heat running. I wrapped myself in an old gray sweatshirt and sat cross-legged on the couch while old rejection emails glowed across the screen. Some of them dated back almost 3 years. I started opening each one slowly, looking for patterns I had ignored before. One rejection came exactly 2 hours after I told my mother about a successful interview. Another happened the morning after she insisted on knowing the company name for prayer purposes. My stomach twisted harder with every email I opened. Then I found one from a medical office in Columbus. I remembered that interview clearly because it had gone so well, I actually cried in my car afterward from relief. The office manager had shaken my hand and said, "I think you are exactly what we are looking for." 12 hours later, they rejected me. At the time, I assumed another candidate had more experience. But now I noticed something else. Right before the rejection email arrived, my mother had called me twice in a row. I stared at the timestamps until my vision blurred. No, that could not be real. I closed the laptop and pressed my palms against my eyes. Diane Bennett was not cruel. She was overprotective, emotional, controlling sometimes, maybe, but not cruel. She brought me homemade soup when I got sick. She mailed me birthday cards with $20 bills folded inside, even after I turned 29. She told everyone at church how proud she was of me. Cruel mothers did not do those things. But another memory surfaced immediately. Quiet and unwelcome. I was 16 years old, standing in the kitchen holding a summer camp acceptance letter. It was a writing program in Vermont, 2 weeks away from home. I had been so excited I could barely breathe while telling my parents about it. My father smiled proudly. My mother smiled too, but something in her face tightened for half a second. 3 days later, the camp director called to say my application had been withdrawn. They claimed a family member informed them I was struggling emotionally and could not safely travel alone. I never questioned it. My mother cried afterward and hugged me tightly while saying, "Some opportunities are not meant for us, sweetheart." I suddenly felt sick. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house before I could lose my nerve. Their neighborhood looked exactly the same as it had my entire life. Clean sidewalks, bare winter trees, American flags hanging from porches. The kind of quiet suburban street where nothing bad was supposed to happen. My father's truck sat in the driveway beside my mother's silver SUV. I stayed in my car for almost 5 minutes gripping the steering wheel while fear crawled through my chest. Then the front door opened before I even reached the porch. My mother smiled warmly the second she saw me. "Claire," she said softly, "I was worried about you." She pulled me into a hug before I could react. Her sweater smelled like vanilla detergent and coffee. Familiar. Safe. For one dangerous second, I almost believed I had imagined everything. You should have called me back last night, she said while leading me inside. I barely slept worrying. My father sat at the kitchen table reading the newspaper with his glasses low on his nose. The television murmured softly in the background. Everything looked painfully normal. "Hey kiddo," he said casually. But when he saw my face, his expression shifted immediately. Fear. Tiny. Fast. But there. My mother started pouring coffee into one of my old mugs before I even sat down. "How did the interview go?" she asked gently. I watched her carefully this time. The calm voice. The concerned smile. The way she avoided direct eye contact for just a second after. Asking the question. "They said someone called them." I replied quietly. Her hand froze very slightly over the coffee mug. "Called them," she repeated. "About what?" I looked directly at her. "They said someone told them I had a criminal record." Silence filled the kitchen instantly. My father lowered the newspaper slowly. My mother let out a short, nervous laugh. "Well, that is ridiculous," she said quickly. "Some people are crazy." Crazy. Another word that suddenly sounded strange coming from her mouth. I sat down carefully across from my father. The recruiter said it was my mother. My mother finally looked at me fully then. Her face stayed calm, but her eyes changed. Not guilt. Calculation. "Claire," she said slowly. "Why would you even entertain something like that?" There it was. The shift. Tiny. Precise. Suddenly the conversation was not about what happened. It was about my reaction to it. My father rubbed his forehead nervously. "Maybe there was some misunderstanding," he muttered. "Misunderstanding?" I repeated. "Dad, they specifically said Mom called them." "Well, maybe they mixed up the names," my mother interrupted smoothly. "Honestly, sweetheart, employers can be very careless these days." She slid the coffee mug toward me with a trembling smile. "You already struggle with anxiety. I do not want you spiraling over nonsense." Spiraling. Anxiety. I noticed every word now. Every subtle little push designed to make me doubt myself. My pulse started pounding harder. "Did you call them?" I asked quietly. My mother stared at me for a long moment. Then she looked hurt. Deeply hurt. It was such a familiar expression that guilt hit me automatically before I could stop it. "Claire," she whispered. "How could you even ask me that?" My father stood up suddenly and walked toward the sink without saying anything. He could not look at me. That was when something inside me finally cracked open completely. Not because of my mother. Because of him. Because he knew something. I could feel it. My mother reached across the table and touched my hand softly. "You have been under so much stress lately," she said gently. "Maybe we should focus on finding you something local. Somewhere smaller. Somewhere safe." Safe. I slowly pulled my hand away from hers for the first time in my life. And for one split second, before she covered it again with concern, I saw anger flash across my mother's face. I left my parents' house 20 minutes later with my chest so tight it hurt to breathe. My mother followed me all the way to the front door wearing that same wounded expression, as if I had somehow betrayed her by asking a simple question. "You are exhausted, Claire," she said softly while snow drifted across the porch behind her. "You have been under too much pressure lately. Do not let stress make you paranoid." Paranoid. The word stayed with me the entire drive home. My windshield wipers pushed slushy snow across the glass while I replayed every second of that conversation in my head. My father refusing to meet my eyes. My mother redirecting every question back onto me. The way her face hardened for one tiny moment when I pulled my hand away. By the time I reached my apartment complex, I felt emotionally numb. I climbed the stairs slowly, unlocked my door, and stood inside the dark apartment listening to silence. Then my phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "I made your favorite chicken soup. I can bring some by later if you want." I stared at the message for a long time before setting the phone face down on the counter. That was how she always operated. Not through screaming. Through care. Through guilt. Through making me feel cruel for doubting her. I suddenly remembered being 13 years old and crying because I was not invited to a birthday party. My mother sat beside me on my bed stroking my hair gently while saying, "Girls can be jealous of sensitive people like you." Years later, I found out she had called the girl's mother and warned her I was emotionally unstable after overhearing me vent about school one night. At the time, she told me she was protecting me from cruel people. Back then, I believed her. I believed everything she said. The next morning, I woke up to another rejection email. "We appreciate your interest in the position." I laughed out loud when I read it. Not because it was funny, because suddenly it felt meaningless. like watching the final scene of a movie after already learning the ending. Around noon, my phone rang again. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something told me to answer. Hello. Claire Bennett. The voice belonged to a man, calm and professional. This is Ethan Cole from Harbor Financial. My pulse immediately quickened. Harbor Financial was the company I interviewed with 2 weeks earlier. The interview I thought had gone perfectly before they suddenly stopped responding. Hi, I replied carefully. There was a pause on the other end. I probably should not be making this call, he said quietly. But I have been thinking about your situation since yesterday. I sat down slowly on the edge of the couch. What situation? Another pause. Then he exhaled heavily. Your mother has contacted multiple employers. The room seemed to tilt slightly. What? I recognized your name immediately when I heard about the interview yesterday, he continued. Because something similar happened during your application with us. My throat tightened so badly I could barely speak. What exactly did she say? Ethan hesitated carefully, like someone stepping onto thin ice. She claimed you had emotional issues. She said you become obsessive under pressure and had legal problems in the past. I pressed my hand against my mouth. I have never had legal problems. I know, he said quietly. Honestly, the call felt strange from the beginning. Most parents do not contact hiring departments about their adult children. Adult children. Hearing those words made something inside me ache unexpectedly. I was 29 years old. 29. Yet somehow my mother still moved through my life like she owned it. Ethan continued carefully. At first, I assumed she was just overprotective. But after hearing about yesterday's incident, I realized this might be a pattern. I could barely breathe now. How many places? I whispered. Silence. I do not know, he admitted. But enough that people in local hiring circles have started recognizing your name. I closed my eyes immediately. Shame flooded through me so hard I thought I might throw up. All this time, strangers had been quietly discussing me behind closed doors while I walked into interviews smiling and hopeful like an idiot. Claire. Ethan's voice softened slightly. I do not think you understand how manipulated this situation sounds from the outside. Manipulated. Nobody had ever used that word about my mother before. Not once. Because Diane Bennett never looked abusive. She looked loving, concerned, devoted. The kind of mother who baked casseroles for neighbors and mailed birthday cards early every year. Why are you telling me this? I asked finally. Because my mother controlled me for years too, he said quietly. The honesty in his voice stunned me. Not like this exactly, but enough that I recognized the signs. I stared at the snow outside my apartment window while my chest tightened painfully. I think she has been doing this my whole life, I whispered before I could stop myself. The words sounded insane hanging in the air, but once spoken, they felt horribly true. After the call ended, I sat motionless for almost an hour. Then slowly, I opened my laptop again. This time, I searched through old messages between me and my mother. Hundreds of them. Tiny details jumped out immediately now that I was actually looking. What company is it? Who interviewed you? What is the hiring manager's name? Every time I got close to independence, she suddenly became intensely involved. I remembered another moment from 4 years earlier when I almost moved to Denver with Nathan. We had toured apartments. We had jobs lined up. Then suddenly Nathan became distant. Nervous. One night, he finally admitted my mother had called him privately. She said you had emotional breakdowns and needed supervision. He told me quietly while avoiding eye contact. At the time, my mother cried for hours when I confronted her. I was worried he would abandon you, she sobbed. Somehow I ended up apologizing to her. My phone buzzed again. Mom calling. I let it ring. Then another text appeared immediately afterward. I know you are upset, sweetheart, but shutting me out is unhealthy. Unhealthy. Another carefully chosen word. I suddenly realized something terrifying. My mother had spent my entire life teaching me not to trust myself. Every instinct, every emotion, every independent thought. If I felt angry, I was overreacting. If I felt hurt, I was sensitive. If I questioned her, I was unstable. Tears finally filled my eyes then, not because I felt weak, but because I was starting to understand how much of my life had been quietly stolen from me while everyone around us called it love. That night, I could not stop remembering things I had spent years trying not to think about. Memory after memory kept surfacing like objects floating up from the bottom of a dark lake. Small moments. Strange moments. Moments I always explained away because the alternative felt impossible. I sat on my couch wrapped in a blanket while snow piled against the windows outside my apartment. And for the first time in my life, I replayed my childhood without automatically defending my mother. It changed everything. When I was 8 years old, my teacher recommended me for an advanced reading program in Cincinnati. I remember how excited I felt carrying the acceptance packet home in my backpack. My mother smiled while reading it at the kitchen table. "That is wonderful, sweetheart," she said warmly. Then later that night, I overheard my parents arguing quietly in their bedroom. My father sounded frustrated. "You cannot keep doing this every time she wants independence." At the time, I did not understand what he meant. 2 days later, my mother told me the program director decided I was too emotionally sensitive for the pressure. I cried for hours while she held me against her chest, saying, "Sometimes rejection protects us from bigger disappointments." Back then, her words felt comforting. Now they felt poisonous. Another memory surfaced immediately after that one. Senior year of high school. I had been accepted to Northwestern University with partial financial aid. It was the happiest I had ever seen my father. He took me out for pancakes that morning and kept saying, "Chicago, kiddo. Can you believe it?" But my mother barely smiled the entire day. A week later, she sat me down at the kitchen table looking pale and exhausted. "Your father and I are very worried about you moving so far away," she said softly. "You have always struggled under stress." Struggled under stress. The phrase sounded so familiar now. "I am fine," I told her back then. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand sadly. "Claire, sweetheart, sometimes you do not realize how fragile you are." Fragile. Another word she loved. Another word that quietly became part of my identity. I turned down Northwestern 2 weeks later and attended a local college instead because my mother cried every night until I did. She told everyone afterward that I made the mature decision to stay close to family. People praised me for it. My mother especially. Around midnight, my phone buzzed again. Another text from her. "Your father says you sounded upset earlier. Please remember we love you more than anything." I stared at the screen without responding. Then another message appeared. "You know the world can be cruel, Claire. Family is the only thing you can truly trust." I suddenly felt cold all over. Not because of the snow outside. Because I finally understood what she had been teaching me my entire life. Do not trust yourself. Do not trust other people. Do not leave. The next morning, I called in sick to my part-time retail job because I could barely think straight. My manager sounded irritated, but honestly I no longer cared. I spent the entire morning going through old journals stored in plastic bins under my bed. Most of them were filled with normal things. College stress, relationship problems, financial worries. But every few pages, I noticed the same pattern repeating over and over. Mom says I overreacted. Mom thinks people misunderstand me. Mom says I am too emotional lately. It was like reading the gradual construction of a prison I never realized I lived inside. Around noon, another memory hit me so hard I had to put the journal down. I was 23 years old, working my first real office job downtown. I loved that job. I loved waking up early, drinking coffee during my commute, feeling like an actual adult with a future. Then suddenly my supervisor started acting strangely around me. Cold, distant. One afternoon, she asked me into her office and gently suggested I take personal leave if I was struggling emotionally. I remember staring at her in complete confusion. "I am not struggling emotionally," I said. She looked embarrassed. A family member expressed concern. My stomach dropped so suddenly I almost dropped the journal onto the floor now, years later. At the time, my mother claimed she only contacted my office because I sounded tired on the phone one night. "I was worried about you having a breakdown," she said tearfully afterward. I apologized to her for getting angry. I apologized. The shame of that realization burned through me so intensely I had to stand up and walk into the kitchen just to breathe normally again. Every time I tried building a life outside her control, she quietly stepped in and damaged it while pretending to protect me. And somehow, she always made me feel guilty afterward. My phone rang suddenly. Dad calling. I hesitated before answering. "Hello." Silence for a second. Then my father sighed heavily. "Your mother is upset," he said quietly. Of course she was. Somehow this entire situation had already become about her feelings. "Dad," I interrupted softly. "Has she done this before?" Another silence. I could hear the television playing faintly in the background at their house. Finally, he spoke. "Your mother worries too much." My chest tightened immediately. That was not a denial. "Dad, My voice cracked slightly. Please. He exhaled shakily. She just wanted to keep you close. I sat down slowly at my kitchen table because suddenly my legs felt weak. What does that mean? Another long silence. Then finally, in a tired voice that sounded 20 years older than usual, my father whispered, "Your mother has always been afraid you would leave and never come back." Tears filled my eyes instantly. Not because I felt sorry for her anymore, because hearing him say it out loud made everything real. "You knew?" I whispered. My father did not answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded full of shame. "Not everything," he admitted quietly. "At least not at first." I closed my eyes. "Dad, Claire, your mother loves you." I laughed then. A sharp, broken sound that barely sounded like me. "No," I whispered. "This is not love." He started crying softly on the other end of the phone. I had never heard my father cry before in my entire life. "I thought she would stop eventually," he said helplessly. "Every time you got close to moving away, she panicked." I pressed my hand against my mouth while tears slid down my face silently. "You let her destroy my life." The silence after that sentence felt endless. Then my father whispered the words that finally shattered whatever remained of my old reality. "I do not think your mother knows how to love people without controlling them." After my father admitted the truth, I stopped answering my mother's calls completely. At first, she responded the way she always did whenever I pulled away from her. Concern, softness, gentle guilt wrapped in loving words. "Sweetheart, please call me. Your father and I are worried sick. Whatever misunderstanding this is, we can fix it together." Together. That word made my skin crawl now. Because every time she said together, what she really meant was under control. By the third day, the messages changed. The warmth disappeared in tiny ways most people would probably never notice. "Ignoring family is unhealthy, Claire. Isolation can make anxiety worse. I hope you are thinking clearly." Thinking clearly. Another phrase carefully designed to make me doubt myself. I stopped listening to the voicemails after that. Instead, I started saving them. Every single one. Ethan had called me again the day after my conversation with my father. This time, we spoke for almost an hour. He explained how my mother's calls usually happened after final interviews. She presented herself as calm and reasonable, concerned. Sometimes she cried softly. Sometimes she framed herself as a worried parent trying to protect employers from future problems. "Honestly, Claire, if I had not spoken to you directly, I probably would have believed her too," he admitted carefully. "That is the scary part." Scary. Yes, that was exactly what this felt like now. Not dramatic, not explosive, quietly terrifying. Ethan encouraged me to start documenting everything. Emails, texts, voicemails, dates, patterns. At first, I felt ridiculous doing it. Sitting alone at my tiny kitchen table with a yellow notebook while snowstorms rolled through Ohio outside my apartment windows. But the more I documented, the clearer the pattern became. Every major opportunity in my life had somehow collapsed after my mother inserted herself into it. And somehow, she always appeared afterward offering comfort. Like someone poisoning a person slowly, then volunteering to play nurse. On Friday afternoon, I finally did something I should have done years earlier. I checked my credit report. My hands trembled while logging into the website because suddenly I no longer trusted anything about my own life. What I found made my stomach drop instantly. Multiple addresses I had never lived at. A utility account briefly opened in my name 7 years earlier. A credit card inquiry tied to my parents' home address. Nothing catastrophic. Nothing illegal enough to immediately trigger alarms. But enough to make me realize how deeply entangled my mother still was in every part of my adult life. I drove straight to the bank after that. The young woman helping me smiled politely while reviewing my accounts. "You still have your mother listed as an authorized emergency contact," she said casually. Of course I did. My mother had helped me open the account when I was 16. I removed her name immediately. Then I changed every password connected to my email, phone carrier, banking apps, and medical records while sitting in my car in the parking lot. With every new password, I felt something strange. Grief. Not freedom yet. Grief. Because every small act of independence felt like admitting my old life had never been real. That evening, my father showed up unexpectedly outside my apartment building. I almost did not buzz him in when he called from downstairs. He looked exhausted when I opened the door. Older somehow. His winter coat was dusted with snow and his eyes looked red, like he had not slept much either. Your mother does not know I came here, he said quietly. I stepped aside silently so he could enter. He sat carefully on my couch, glancing around the apartment like he was seeing it for the first time. The peeling kitchen linoleum, the thrift store furniture, the stack of overdue bills sitting near the microwave. Shame flickered across his face immediately. Claire, he whispered. I crossed my arms tightly. How long? He looked down at his hands. Longer than I should have allowed. Allowed. The word hit me hard. You could have stopped her. I tried sometimes, he said weakly. But every time you got serious about leaving, she would panic. Panic. Everyone kept using soft words for what she did. Panic. Worry. Concern. Love. I sat across from him quietly. Tell me the truth, I said finally. No protecting her anymore. My father stared at the floor for a long moment before speaking. After you graduated college, there was a publishing internship in New York. My chest tightened immediately. I remembered that internship. It had been my dream opportunity. They stopped responding after the second interview. I whispered. My father nodded slowly. Your mother called them pretending to be your therapist. I felt all the air leave my lungs. What? His eyes filled with tears instantly. She told them you were emotionally fragile and had episodes under stress. Episodes. I could barely process the word. Dad, my voice cracked. Why would you let her do that? He covered his face briefly with trembling hands. Because every time I confronted her, she fell apart. She would cry for hours. She would stop eating. She kept saying she was terrified you would disappear forever. I stood up abruptly and walked toward the window because suddenly I could not bear sitting still anymore. Snow covered the parking lot below us in smooth white layers. Everything looked quiet outside. Peaceful. Meanwhile, my entire reality kept collapsing piece by piece. Do you know what the worst part is? I whispered finally. My father looked at me helplessly. I believed her. Tears slid down my face before I could stop them. Every failure. Every rejection. Every ruined relationship. I thought something was wrong with me. My father started crying softly again. There was never anything wrong with you, kiddo. Kiddo. Hearing him call me that suddenly made me angry instead of comforted. Because I was not a child anymore. I had not been one for a very long time. Yet somehow my parents still spoke about my life like it belonged to them. My father wiped his eyes shakily. Your mother thinks she protected you from disappointment. I turned around slowly. No, I said quietly. She made sure disappointment was the only thing I ever had. Silence filled the apartment after that. Heavy. Final. Then my father reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I found this in your mother's desk this morning, he whispered. I unfolded it slowly. It was a printed list. My stomach twisted immediately when I recognized the company names. Every place I had applied to during the last 18 months. Some names had check marks beside them. Others had handwritten notes in my mother's neat cursive handwriting. Called HR. Spoke to manager directly. Too far away. My hands started shaking so badly the paper nearly slipped onto the floor. At the very bottom of the page, beside an apartment complex in Seattle connected to a job I applied for 3 months earlier, my mother had written 6 words that completely shattered me. Must not let her leave. After my father left that night, I sat alone at my kitchen table staring at the list my mother had kept hidden in her desk. The paper trembled slightly in my hands every time I breathed. Company names. Dates. Notes written in her neat handwriting like she was organizing recipes instead of sabotaging my entire future. Too far away. Watch this one. Must not let her leave. I read those words over and over until they stopped looking real. Outside, snow pressed softly against my apartment windows while traffic moved slowly through the icy streets below. The entire world looked quiet and normal while my life kept splitting open wider with every new truth. Around midnight, my phone rang again. Mom calling. I stared at it without moving. It rang 4 times before stopping, then immediately started again. By the third call, a voicemail appeared. I almost deleted it automatically. Instead, I pressed play. Claire. My mother's voice sounded calm at first. Controlled. Your father told me he stopped by your apartment tonight. A pause. I wish he had not done that. Another pause. Then her voice softened into the familiar tone she used whenever she wanted me to feel guilty. Sweetheart, I know you are upset right now, but you are letting fear distort reality. Fear distort reality. I leaned back slowly in my chair, listening carefully now. Everything your father showed you was taken out of context, she continued gently. You have always misunderstood situations when you are emotional. Emotional. There it was again. Another quiet little attempt to rewrite my mind while pretending to comfort me. I only ever wanted to keep you safe, she whispered. The world is not kind to vulnerable people like you. Vulnerable. I suddenly realized something horrifying. My mother never described me using positive words connected to strength. Never independent. Never capable. Never resilient. Only fragile. Sensitive. Emotional. Vulnerable. Like she needed me weak in order to justify controlling me. The voicemail ended with the same words she had repeated my entire life. Nobody will ever love you the way family does. I sat there staring into the darkness of my apartment long after the message ended. Then slowly, I saved the voicemail into a separate folder on my phone labeled evidence. Seeing that word made my chest tighten painfully. Evidence. Against my own mother. The next morning, Ethan met me for coffee downtown. It was the first time I had seen him in person outside of an interview setting. He looked older than I originally thought. Mid-30s maybe. Calm eyes. Careful posture. The kind of person who listened more than he spoke. Snow still covered most of the sidewalks outside the cafe, and people hurried past bundled in winter coats while soft jazz played quietly overhead inside. Normal life continued around me while I felt like I was slowly waking up inside a nightmare. Ethan listened quietly while I told him about the list my father found. He did not interrupt once. When I finally finished speaking, he rubbed his jaw thoughtfully and asked, "Has your mother ever faced consequences for this behavior before?" I stared down at my coffee cup. "No," I admitted. Quietly. "Everyone always excuses it because she sounds caring." Ethan nodded slowly like he already expected that answer. "That is how controlling people survive for so long," he said carefully. "Especially parents. They hide behind concern." Concern. Such an innocent word for something that had quietly destroyed entire years of my life. Ethan leaned back slightly. "Claire, I think you need to stop confronting her emotionally." I looked up. "What do you mean?" "Right now, she still believes she can manipulate your perception of reality," he explained. "Every conversation becomes about your feelings instead of her actions." I realized immediately he was right. Every single time I questioned my mother, the conversation somehow turned into whether I was stressed, overwhelmed, emotional, paranoid, sensitive, unstable, or confused. Never what she actually did. Ethan lowered his voice slightly. "You need proof she cannot explain away." Proof. The words settled heavily between us. Because deep down, I already knew he was right too. My mother would never confess willingly. She would cry, redirect, manipulate, rewrite, but she would never simply admit the truth. "How?" I whispered. Ethan hesitated briefly before speaking. "Set a trap." I stared at him. He continued carefully. "Apply for another position. One she does not know is fake. See if she contacts them." The idea made my stomach twist immediately. "That sounds insane." "Claire," he said gently, "your mother has spent years quietly controlling your life while making you believe you imagined it. At this point, certainty matters." Certainty. I looked out the cafe window at snow drifting through the gray Ohio afternoon, while something cold and steady began forming inside me for the first time since all of this started. Not panic. Not grief. Focus. By the time I returned home that evening, my mother had left 4 more voicemails. The tone had shifted again. Less warmth now. More pressure. "Your father is very upset. You are tearing this family apart. I do not know why you are punishing us." Punishing. That word almost made me laugh. She had sabotaged my future for years, and somehow my silence was the real cruelty. I spent the rest of the night building the fake application with Ethan's help over video chat. A marketing coordinator position for a small consulting company opening a new branch in Columbus. Ethan arranged everything through a friend who owned the business. The job did not actually exist, but the company did. The hiring email did. The office phone number did. Every detail looked completely real. My pulse pounded the entire time we worked, because some part of me still hoped my mother would not do it again. Some pathetic little part of me still wanted this entire nightmare to somehow be a misunderstanding. Around 10 o'clock, I finally sent my mother a carefully crafted text message. "Interview went really well today. Small consulting company in Columbus. They seem excited about me." 3 dots appeared almost immediately as she typed back. "That is wonderful, sweetheart. I am proud of you." Proud. I stared at the word until my vision blurred. Then another message appeared. What is the company called? There it was. Same pattern. Same question. Same hook sliding quietly into place exactly like it had dozens of times before. My hands trembled while typing the company name. After sending it, I sat motionless on my couch holding my phone while snow tapped softly against the windows. 1 minute passed, then 5, then 10. Finally, another message appeared. I have a good feeling about this one. I closed my eyes slowly, because somehow, after everything she had already done, those words scared me more than anything else. The call came the next afternoon. I was sitting on my couch pretending to watch television while my phone rested beside me like a live grenade. Every nerve in my body felt stretched tight. Ethan had warned me the company's receptionist would notify him immediately if anyone suspicious called asking about me. Still, part of me remained frozen between terror and hope. Terror that my mother really would do it again. Hope that maybe she would not. At exactly 2:17 p.m., my phone buzzed. Ethan. My chest tightened instantly before I answered. Hello. There was a pause on the other end. Then Ethan spoke quietly. She called. I closed my eyes. Immediately, the room felt completely silent around me. Are you sure it was her? I whispered, even though deep down I already knew. Yes, he said carefully. And Claire, we recorded the conversation. Recorded. My fingers started shaking so badly, I nearly dropped the phone. Ethan exhaled softly. I think you should come hear it yourself. Snow melted slowly along the sidewalks when I drove downtown an hour later. Gray slush lined the streets while dirty piles of ice clung stubbornly to parking lots and curbs. Everything looked dull and exhausted under the cloudy February sky. I barely remember parking my car or walking into the consulting office because my heartbeat was so loud it drowned out almost everything else. Ethan met me in the lobby with a serious expression. You okay? He asked gently. I nodded automatically, even though I absolutely was not okay. He led me into a small conference room where another woman sat waiting beside a laptop. This is Karen, he explained. She owns the company. Karen gave me a sympathetic smile that somehow made everything feel even more humiliating. Because now strangers were sitting in rooms discussing my mother like she was dangerous. Ethan closed the conference room door quietly before opening the laptop. Claire, he said carefully. You do not have to listen if you are not ready. But I already knew I needed to hear it. I sat down slowly and whispered, Play it. Static crackled softly for a second. Then my mother's voice filled the room. Calm, polite, warm. Hello, she said gently. My name is Diane Bennett. I apologize for bothering you, but I felt morally obligated to make this call. Morally obligated. My stomach twisted instantly. Karen pressed her lips together uncomfortably beside me while the recording continued. We are currently interviewing Claire Bennett for a position here. The receptionist explained politely. Are you a reference? A soft sigh from my mother. Not officially, she replied carefully. I am her mother. Silence followed briefly. Then my mother lowered her voice into that familiar tone, filled with concern and sadness. I know Claire can appear very capable at first, she said softly. But, unfortunately, she struggles with emotional instability and impulsive behavior. I stopped breathing. Hearing her say it out loud felt completely different than imagining it. More calculated, more practiced, like she had delivered this speech many times before. The receptionist hesitated. Could you clarify what you mean? My mother sighed again sadly. I hate discussing private family matters, but I would feel terrible if something happened and I stayed silent. I pressed my fingernails into my palms hard enough to hurt. Claire has had episodes in the past where she becomes obsessive under stress, my mother continued. There were also legal concerns a few years ago involving destructive behavior. Legal concerns. Destructive behavior. None of it was real. None of it had ever happened. Yet she sounded so convincing saying it. So calm. So reasonable. Has she been formally diagnosed with anything? The receptionist asked cautiously. My mother paused just long enough to sound reluctant. Doctors suspected several things over the years, she whispered. But Claire tends to avoid treatment. I felt physically sick. Karen reached over quietly and paused the recording. Silence filled the conference room immediately. I stared at the table while heat rushed through my chest in painful waves. Ethan spoke softly. Claire, I could not answer right away. Because suddenly every rejection email, every failed interview, every confused expression from hiring managers made horrifying sense all at once. My mother was not simply warning people about me. She was creating an entire fictional version of me. Fragile, dangerous, mentally unstable, impossible to trust. Karen finally spoke carefully. For what it is worth, once the call ended, none of us believed her. I looked up automatically. She gave me a sad smile. Not completely anyway. There were too many specifics that sounded rehearsed. Rehearsed. Of course it was rehearsed. She had probably been refining these lies for years. Ethan restarted the recording quietly. My mother's voice returned immediately. I only want what is best for Claire, she said softly. She depends on family more than she realizes. Depends on family. I suddenly remembered something else from years earlier. After my breakup with Nathan, my mother hugged me while saying, "At least now you still have us." At the time, I thought she was comforting me. Now I wondered if she had been relieved. The recording continued. I know employers have to protect themselves, my mother added gently. And honestly, Claire does not handle rejection very well. Rejection. The irony of hearing her say that almost made me laugh. She created the rejection, then comforted me afterward like a savior cleaning up damage she secretly caused herself. Karen finally stopped the recording completely. The room went silent except for the faint humming of fluorescent lights overhead. I stared at the dark laptop screen, feeling strangely detached from my own body. Like part of my brain still refused to accept that the woman who taught me how to ride a bicycle also spent years destroying my future behind closed doors. Ethan sat across from me carefully. "Claire," he said softly, "what she is doing is serious." Serious. Such a small word for something that had quietly reshaped my entire adult life. I wiped my eyes quickly before tears could fully fall. "Do you know what the worst part is?" I whispered. Neither of them answered. I looked down at my trembling hands. "She sounds loving." Karen's expression shifted immediately because she understood exactly what I meant. My mother did not sound hateful on that recording. She sounded heartbroken, protective, concerned, like a mother making a painful sacrifice for the greater good. That was what made everything so confusing for so many years. Monsters are easier to recognize when they scream. My mother smiled. She baked pies for church fundraisers. She sent birthday cards. She remembered everyone's allergies at Thanksgiving. Then quietly, privately, she poisoned every path leading away from her. Ethan leaned forward slightly. "What do you want to do now?" I stared out the conference room window at the gray Ohio sky, while something cold and steady settled deeper inside me. The grief was still there. The shock too. But underneath both, another feeling had started growing quietly. Clarity. For the first time in my life, I was finally seeing my mother exactly as she was instead of who she pretended to be. And somehow, that realization frightened me less than staying blind ever again. After hearing the recording, I stopped feeling confused. The grief was still there. The shock too. But confusion disappeared completely. My mother knew exactly what she was doing. Every pause in her voice. Every carefully chosen word. Every false expression of concern. None of it was accidental. She had built an entire version of me for strangers to fear while smiling at me across dinner tables, pretending to love me. I drove home slowly through freezing rain that evening while the recording played over and over in my head. Claire struggles with emotional instability. Claire becomes obsessive under stress. Claire depends on family more than she realizes. By the time I pulled into my apartment complex, I realized something that hurt more than the lies themselves. My mother had spent years teaching me to describe myself the exact same way. I walked upstairs in complete silence and unlocked my apartment door. The moment I stepped inside, I looked around differently. The tiny living room, the thrift store coffee table, the secondhand dishes drying beside the sink. I used to see failure when I looked at my life. Now I saw sabotage, because I was never allowed to build anything stable enough to escape her. I barely slept that night. Around 4 a.m, I found myself sitting on the floor beside my bed surrounded by old photo albums and storage boxes. I do not even remember deciding to open them. I just suddenly needed to see my life clearly for once. Every picture felt different now. In one photo, I was 10 years old holding a science fair ribbon while my mother smiled proudly beside me. I remembered that competition. I had been invited to nationals afterward. But suddenly the trip became too overwhelming, according to my mother. In another photo, I was 17 standing beside Nathan at prom. We looked happy, normal, young. My mother hated Nathan from the beginning. At the time, she claimed he distracted me from school. Years later, after our relationship ended, Nathan admitted something quietly over coffee one afternoon. Your mom kept calling me, he said carefully. She said you were emotionally unstable and sometimes violent during arguments. Violent. I remembered staring at him in complete disbelief back then. You know that is not true, I told him immediately. Nathan looked miserable. I know that now. At the time, I got angry at him for even listening to her. Now I realized he was just another person caught inside her manipulation. Around noon the next day, my father called again. His voice sounded exhausted. Your mother has barely slept, he said quietly. I almost laughed. Somehow we were still discussing her suffering while mine sat ignored in the background like furniture. Dad, I said carefully, did she ever sabotage your life too? Silence filled the phone immediately. Then he exhaled heavily. Not directly. Not directly. Interesting answer. But, another pause. Your mother does not handle abandonment well. There was that soft language again. Abandonment. As if I was discussing a frightened child instead of a grown woman who secretly destroyed her daughter's future. My father continued quietly. When we first got married, she stopped speaking to her own sister for 6 years after she moved to California. I frowned immediately. Aunt Linda? Your mother told everyone Linda betrayed the family, he said tiredly. But honestly, Linda just wanted her own life. I sat down slowly at my kitchen table while another memory surfaced unexpectedly. I had only met Aunt Linda a handful of times growing up despite the fact she lived only 2 states away. My mother always described her as selfish, cold, disloyal. Some women only care about themselves, she used to say whenever Linda came up in conversation. Suddenly I wondered if Aunt Linda had escaped. The thought unsettled me deeply. Did Aunt Linda know? I whispered. My father hesitated. She tried warning me once. My chest tightened instantly. What did she say? He let out a shaky breath. She said your mother confuses love with possession. Possession. The word landed heavily in my chest because it explained everything so perfectly. My mother did not love people unless they stayed small enough to belong to her. The moment someone tried growing beyond her reach, she panicked and tightened her grip. That evening, I finally called Aunt Linda myself. My hands shook dialing the number because I had not spoken to her in almost 8 years. She answered on the 3rd ring, sounding surprised. Claire. Just hearing warmth in her voice without hidden manipulation behind it almost made me cry immediately. We talked for nearly 2 hours. And slowly, piece by piece, Aunt Linda confirmed every fear I had been trying to suppress. Your mother has always needed control, she said carefully. Even when we were children. She described how my mother sabotaged friendships growing up whenever people became too independent. How she spread rumors about a cousin who moved out at 19. How she once called Linda's college boyfriend pretending to be concerned about Linda's mental health. My stomach twisted painfully hearing that. Why did nobody stop her? I whispered. Aunt Linda went quiet for a moment. Because your mother hides inside kindness, she said softly. People only see the casseroles and birthday cards. They do not see what happens privately. Exactly. That was the hardest part explaining this to myself. My mother looked loving from the outside. Sometimes even to me. That was what made the betrayal feel so disorienting. Claire, Aunt Linda said gently, you need to understand something important. I gripped the phone tighter. Your mother will never admit what she did. Deep down, I already knew that. Still, hearing it out loud hurt. She genuinely believes controlling people is love, Aunt Linda continued sadly. And anyone who pulls away becomes the villain in her mind. Villain. The word echoed painfully through me because I could already feel it happening. In my mother's version of reality, I was no longer her daughter. I was the cruel, unstable child abandoning her family after everything they sacrificed. I thanked Aunt Linda quietly before ending the call. Then I sat alone in my apartment listening to the refrigerator hum softly in the kitchen while rain tapped against the windows. My phone buzzed suddenly. Beside me, another message from my mother. I heard you spoke to Linda. Be careful who you trust, sweetheart. Some people enjoy tearing families apart. I stared at the screen for a long time before finally realizing something that should have terrified me, but strangely did not anymore. My mother was watching me lose faith in her. And for the first time in my life, she was starting to lose control. The strange thing about losing trust in someone is that once it happens, you start noticing things that were always there. Tiny details, small expressions, little shifts in tone that once felt normal suddenly become impossible to ignore. Over the next week, I stopped arguing with my mother completely. I stopped confronting her. Stopped asking questions. Stopped trying to force honesty from someone who built her entire life around avoiding it. Instead, I watched. And for the first time in my life, I think my mother felt truly unsettled by me. She called every day like always, but now I answered calmly. Politely. I gave short responses. I am fine. Work is okay. I am tired. Nothing emotional. Nothing personal. At first, she sounded relieved. Then gradually, her voice changed. She started fishing for reactions. You sound distant. Are you angry with me? Your father says you barely talk anymore. Every sentence carried the same invisible question underneath it. Can I still reach inside your head? One evening, she stopped by my apartment unexpectedly carrying grocery bags full of food. You barely eat when you are stressed, she said softly while placing soup containers into my refrigerator like nothing had happened between us. I leaned against the kitchen counter watching her move around my apartment with familiar ease. For years, scenes like this made me feel loved. Safe. Now they made me feel observed. Controlled. She paused suddenly while putting away canned soup. You changed your passwords. My chest tightened instantly, but I kept my face calm. Yes. She forced a small laugh. I tried logging into your insurance portal to help you compare plans and could not get in. Help you compare plans. Another normal-sounding sentence hiding something deeply wrong. Underneath it, I stared at her quietly. I can manage my own insurance. Something flickered across her face for half a second. Not sadness. Irritation. Of course you can. She replied quickly with a smile that no longer looked genuine to me. Then she added softly, I just worry because you get overwhelmed so easily. There it was again. Always the same script. Fragile. Emotional. Overwhelmed. Vulnerable. She needed me weak because strong people leave. I started noticing other things too. She asked strange questions casually during conversations. Have you applied anywhere new? Any interviews outside Ohio? Still talking to that recruiter friend? Every question sounded harmless alone. Together, they felt like surveillance. I answered carefully every time. Never enough to satisfy her completely. Never enough to reveal my real thoughts either. Ethan encouraged me to keep documenting everything. So I did. Every voicemail. Every manipulative text. Every conversation where my mother subtly tried steering me back into dependence. The folder on my laptop labeled evidence kept growing larger. Some nights, I stared at it for long stretches without opening anything, because seeing my own mother reduced to digital proof made me physically sick. But another feeling had started growing quietly underneath the grief. Anger. Not explosive anger. Worse. Cold anger. The kind that settles slowly into your bones after years of humiliation finally begin making sense. One afternoon, my father came to my apartment again while my mother was at church. He looked thinner than usual. More exhausted every time I saw him. We sat at my kitchen table drinking coffee in silence for several minutes before he finally spoke. She knows you are slipping away. I stared into my coffee cup quietly. Good. My father winced slightly at the word. Claire. Dad. I interrupted softly. Do you know what it feels like realizing your entire life was manipulated? He looked down immediately. No, I do not know what memories are even real anymore. My voice sounded strangely calm saying it. Every success feels controlled. Every failure feels planted. He rubbed his forehead tiredly. Your mother did. Love you. I laughed quietly before I could stop myself. That sentence means less to me every day. Silence settled heavily between us. Then my father whispered something that surprised me. I should have left years ago. I looked up immediately. He stared toward the window while snow drifted outside in soft gray waves. The first time she sabotaged one of your opportunities, I convinced myself she was scared. His voice cracked slightly. Then it kept happening. Why did you stay? I asked quietly. He looked older than I had ever seen him. Because eventually you start managing the damage instead of stopping it. The sadness in his voice hurt almost as much as my anger toward him. Because I realized my father had spent decades shrinking himself to survive my mother too. Not the same way I had, but enough that fear became normal inside their house. He stood up slowly before leaving and placed an envelope on the kitchen table. These are copies of emails your mother sent from my old laptop years ago, he said quietly. My pulse quickened immediately. After he left, I opened the envelope carefully. Printed emails slid onto the table. Some were to employers, others to old friends of mine. One message made my stomach drop instantly. It was addressed to Nathan from 6 years earlier. I am deeply concerned Claire may become emotionally dependent on you. She struggles with instability during stressful transitions. Stressful transitions. Such polished language for emotional sabotage. Another email was sent to the director of my New York internship years ago. Claire has a tendency to become emotionally volatile when isolated from family support systems. Volatile. I pressed my hand against my mouth while staring at the words. My mother had not simply ruined opportunities. She carefully built a reputation around me. One designed to follow me quietly into every room before I even entered it myself. Around midnight, my phone buzzed with another message from her. I miss my daughter. I stared at the words for a long time. Then another text appeared. I hope nobody is filling your head with lies about me. Lies about me. Even now, after recordings and evidence and years of manipulation finally exposed, she still framed herself as the victim of misunderstanding. I suddenly realized something important then. My mother would never stop. Not because she hated me. Because in her mind, losing control of me felt the same as losing me entirely. And people who cannot separate love from possession will destroy the things they claim to care about just to keep them close. I looked around my apartment slowly after that realization settled in. The tiny kitchen, the worn couch, the overdue bills still sitting unopened near the microwave. For years, I thought this small life proved I was weak, broken somehow. But suddenly I saw something different. Survival. Even after years of sabotage, I was still here, still trying, still building a future my mother kept attempting to erase. And for the first time in my life, I quietly decided something while snow fell outside my windows and my mother waited for another reply that would never come. I was going to leave Ohio. And this time, she was not going to stop me. Once I decided to leave Ohio, something inside me changed completely. The fear was still there, but it no longer controlled me the way it used to. For the first time in years, my future felt like something I might actually own instead of something my mother could quietly reshape behind the scenes. Ethan helped me update my resume again, while Karen connected me with legitimate job opportunities outside the state. This time, I told almost nobody. Not my father. Not old friends. Certainly not my mother. Every application went through private email accounts she could not access. Every interview was scheduled carefully, quietly, secretly. It felt strange operating this way around my own family, but I no longer trusted normal behavior to protect me. One Tuesday morning, I interviewed remotely for a communications position with a nonprofit organization in Seattle. The office overlooked Elliott Bay, and even through the video call, I could see gray water stretching behind the hiring manager's office windows. The woman interviewing me was named Rebecca Moore. She spoke warmly and directly, asking thoughtful questions about my work history and writing experience. By the end of the interview, she smiled and said, "Claire, honestly, I think you would fit beautifully here." Beautifully. Such a simple word. Yet hearing genuine encouragement without hidden manipulation behind it nearly made me emotional. 2 hours later, Rebecca emailed asking for a second interview with the executive director. I stared at the message for almost 5 full minutes before responding, because part of me still expected everything to collapse suddenly like it always had before. But this time, there was one critical difference. My mother did not know. Or at least, I thought she did not know. That evening, my phone rang while I was making pasta in my kitchen. Mom calling. I almost ignored it automatically, but something told me to answer. "Hi, Mom." Silence for a second. Then her soft voice. "How was your day, sweetheart?" I stirred the pasta slowly while answering carefully. "Fine. Anything exciting happen?" There it was. Casual curiosity hiding sharper intent underneath it. Not really. Another pause. No interviews. My hand tightened slightly around the wooden spoon. Just retail work. Silence again. Then she laughed softly. "Well, at least that job keeps you busy." Busy. Not fulfilled. Not successful. Just occupied enough to stay nearby and dependent. "I should go," I said calmly. "I am cooking dinner." Her voice sharpened very slightly. "You sound cold lately." I stared at the boiling water on the stove while choosing my words carefully. "I am tired, Mom." Then, in the gentlest voice imaginable, she whispered, "I miss when you needed me." The words settled heavily into the silence between us. Not because they sounded cruel, because they sounded honest. After the call ended, I stood motionless in my kitchen for a long time while steam rose from the stove. "I miss when you needed me." Not I miss you. Not I love you. Needed. 2 days later, Rebecca emailed again. The executive director wanted to move forward quickly. They discussed relocation assistance, benefits, housing recommendations near downtown Seattle. Every email felt unreal, fragile somehow, like happiness balanced carefully on thin glass. I did not tell anyone, not even Ethan at first. I was terrified of what might happen if the opportunity became visible before it became official. But deep down, another fear kept growing quietly inside me. My mother always found out somehow. Friday afternoon, I finally received the formal offer letter. Full-time salary, health insurance, relocation support, start date in 6 weeks. My hands shook while reading it. 6 weeks. In 6 weeks, I could be living nearly 2,400 miles away from Ohio. 2,400 miles away from my mother's control. I should have felt excited. Instead, I felt hunted. That night, snow fell heavily outside while I sat alone on my couch rereading the offer letter over and over again. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. My chest tightened instantly before answering. Hello. A woman's voice responded carefully. Hi, is this Claire Bennett? Yes. This is Rebecca Moore from the Seattle office. My stomach dropped immediately. Something was wrong. Rebecca? There was hesitation on the line. Claire, did you give a family member permission to contact us? The room went completely still around me. I closed my eyes slowly. No, what happened? I whispered. Rebecca sounded uncomfortable now. A woman claiming to be your mother called our executive director this afternoon. My hands started shaking instantly. What did she say? Silence. Then Rebecca exhaled heavily. She claimed you have a history of emotional instability and become unpredictable when isolated from family support. I gripped the edge of the couch so hard my fingers hurt. She found out. Somehow she found out. Rebecca continued carefully. Honestly, Claire, the call felt inappropriate. But because we work in nonprofit outreach, leadership takes behavioral concerns seriously. Behavioral concerns. I suddenly felt physically sick. Rebecca, I whispered, none of that is true. I know, she replied softly. At least, I think I know. Think, not know. Because my mother never told obvious lies. She planted doubt carefully. Just enough uncertainty to poison trust before relationships could fully form. There is more, Rebecca admitted quietly. My pulse pounded painfully. What? Another pause. She cried during the call. Of course she did. I covered my eyes with my hand while Rebecca continued speaking softly in the background. She kept saying she was terrified of losing you. That you become mentally fragile when separated from family. Fragile. Always fragile. My chest hurt so badly it became difficult to breathe normally. 2,400 miles away, and she still found me. Even after everything. Even after passwords changed and secret applications and careful silence. Somehow, she still reached inside my future like she owned it. Rebecca spoke again carefully. The executive director wants to pause final processing until things are clarified. Clarified. I almost laughed. Because suddenly I understood something horrible. My mother was never trying to completely destroy me. She was trying to make every opportunity unstable enough that eventually I would stop trying to leave at all. After the call ended, I sat frozen in silence while snow covered the parking lot outside my apartment in thick white layers. Then slowly my phone buzzed again. Mom calling. I stared at her name glowing across the screen while my entire body trembled with anger, so cold it no longer even felt emotional. And for the first time in my life, I finally understood exactly what my mother was most afraid of. Not losing me. Losing control. I did not answer my mother's call that night. Instead, I sat alone in my apartment holding the phone while snow buried the parking lot outside in silence. Something inside me had finally gone completely still. Not numb. Not broken. Clear. For weeks, I kept waiting to feel confusion again. Guilt. Doubt. Some desperate urge to explain myself to her one more time. But after Seattle, even that disappeared. My mother found a job opportunity nearly 2,400 miles away and sabotaged it within hours. No confrontation. No discussion. No hesitation. Just another quiet phone call delivered in the voice of a loving mother while she slowly dismantled my future behind the scenes. I stared at the dark television screen across the room and realized something strange. I was no longer afraid of losing her. I was afraid of staying. Trapped inside her version of love forever. The next morning, my father called before sunrise. His voice sounded panicked immediately. Your mother knows about Seattle. I laughed softly without humor. Obviously. Silence filled the line for a second. Claire, she is not handling this well. There it was again. Another gentle phrase hiding destruction underneath it. Not handling this well. Like we were discussing stress instead of years of manipulation. Dad, I interrupted quietly. I need you to stop protecting her with language. He went silent. She sabotaged another job, I continued. A job across the country. After recordings. After evidence. After everything. My father sounded exhausted. I know. I stared out the frosted kitchen window while dawn slowly brightened the snow outside. I am done pretending this is normal. Another silence. Then my father whispered, What are you going to do? I looked toward the folders sitting on my kitchen table. Printed emails. Voicemails. Recordings. Years of quiet sabotage collected into physical proof. I am going to tell the truth. That evening, my parents hosted a small family dinner at their house for my cousin Melanie's birthday. Normally, I would have found an excuse not to go after everything that happened. But this time, I said yes immediately. My mother sounded relieved on the phone. Too relieved. I knew you would come around, she said softly. Come around. Like clarity itself was some temporary emotional phase I would eventually recover from. Snow crunched beneath my boots when I arrived that night. Warm yellow light glowed through the windows while familiar voices drifted softly from inside the house. The same house where my entire life had quietly narrowed year after year without me realizing it. I stood on the porch for several seconds before going inside. My mother opened the door, smiling warmly the second she saw me. Claire. Her voice carried instant relief. She hugged me tightly while guests laughed in the dining room behind her. I am so glad you came. I did not hug her back. Not really. Just enough to avoid a scene. The house smelled like roasted chicken and cinnamon candles. My cousin Melanie sat at the dining table beside her husband while my aunt poured wine into glasses nearby. Everything looked painfully ordinary. My mother moved through the kitchen gracefully refilling drinks and adjusting silverware while chatting softly with relatives. Watching her almost made me dizzy, because if I had not known the truth, I would still think she was the kindest woman in the room. During dinner, she kept glancing toward me carefully, measuring me, watching for signs. But I stayed calm, quiet, polite. For once, I understood something important. My mother depended on emotional reactions. Fear, guilt, defensiveness. Without those things, she no longer knew how to control me. Halfway through dessert, my cousin smiled at me. So, Claire, your mom said you might finally be looking at jobs outside Ohio again. I looked slowly toward my mother. She froze almost imperceptibly beside the cake plates. There it was again. Information control. Even now, she framed my future like something filtered through her first. Actually, I said calmly, Seattle offered me a position recently. The room brightened immediately with interest. Seattle? Melanie smiled. That is amazing. My mother laughed softly before anyone else could speak. Well, nothing was finalized, she said quickly. There were concerns. Concerns. The word hung in the air like smoke. I reached calmly into my purse and pulled out my phone. My mother's smile faltered immediately. Claire, she said softly. I placed the phone onto the dining table between us and opened the recording app. I think everyone should hear the concerns. Silence spread across the room instantly. My father lowered his eyes before I even pressed play. Then my mother's voice filled the dining room. Calm, gentle, controlled. Claire struggles with emotional instability. Nobody moved. My cousin's smile disappeared immediately. She becomes obsessive under stress. My aunt slowly set down her wine glass. I only want to protect people from potential problems. The room felt completely frozen around us while my mother sat motionless beside the table, pale and staring at me. I let the recording continue. Every lie, every false concern, every carefully rehearsed sentence delivered in the voice of a loving mother. When the recording finally ended, silence swallowed the room completely. My mother looked around slowly at everyone staring back at her in shock. Then tears filled her eyes instantly. Of course they did. I did it because I love her, she whispered shakily. There it was. The sentence she probably believed explained everything. But this time, something inside me no longer responded to it. No guilt. No confusion. Nothing. I looked directly at her while the entire room held its breath. No, I said quietly. You did it because you could not stand the idea of me belonging to myself. My mother started crying harder immediately. "Claire, sweetheart, please, sweetheart." The same words she used while destroying opportunity after opportunity behind my back. I stood up slowly from the table. Nobody stopped me. Nobody defended her. Even my father stayed silent. My mother reached toward me desperately as I grabbed my coat. "You are making me sound monstrous." I looked at her for a long moment then. Really looked at her. The tears. The panic. The fear underneath it all. And suddenly I realized something heartbreaking. My mother truly did not understand the difference between loving someone and controlling them. To her, they had become the same thing long ago. "No," I whispered softly. "I am finally describing you accurately." Then I walked out into the cold Ohio night, while snow fell silently around me. And for the first time in my entire life, I did not look back. 3 months after the dinner at my parents' house, I stood beside the window of a small apartment in Seattle watching rain slide down the glass, while ferries moved slowly across Elliott Bay in the distance. The apartment was barely 600 square feet. The kitchen cabinets were old. The radiator clanked every morning around 6. And half the time the entire place smelled faintly like coffee from the cafe downstairs. I loved it more than any place I had ever lived in my life. Because for the first time, every part of it belonged to me. The nonprofit job worked out after all. Not immediately. After the phone call from my mother. The executive director delayed everything for almost 2 weeks. But Rebecca fought for me quietly behind the scenes. She listened to the recordings, read the emails, looked through the evidence folder. Ethan helped me organize. Eventually, the director called me personally one rainy afternoon and said something I still think about sometimes. "Claire, healthy parents do not sabotage their children's futures." Healthy parents. Such a simple sentence. Yet hearing it from someone outside my family felt strangely life-changing. I moved to Seattle in early April with 2 suitcases, a borrowed moving van, and less than $4,000 in savings. My father helped me load the truck silently the morning I left Ohio. My mother never came outside. I could see the curtains moving in the front window while boxes scraped against the driveway and cold spring wind pushed dead leaves across the yard. At one point, my father stopped beside the truck and looked at me with tears in his eyes. "I am sorry," he whispered. I believed he meant it. But I also understood something now that I did not understand before. Sometimes people can love you and still fail you completely. I hugged him goodbye anyway. Then I got into the truck and drove west without turning around. The first few weeks in Seattle felt unreal. I kept waiting for disaster. Waiting for someone at work to suddenly pull me aside and mention concerns. Waiting for rejection to appear out of nowhere like it always had before. But it never came. My coworkers treated me normally. They trusted me with projects. They invited me to lunch. Nobody looked nervous around me. Nobody spoke carefully like I might break apart at any moment. Slowly, painfully, I started realizing something almost impossible to process. The unstable version of myself my mother created did not actually exist outside her influence. One Friday afternoon, Rebecca stopped beside my desk smiling. "The board loved your presentation," she said casually. "You should be proud of yourself." Proud. The word hit me strangely because I realized I had almost never heard praise without conditions attached to it. My mother praised me when I stayed close. When I stayed dependent. When I stayed small enough to fit safely inside her world. But this was different. This praise expected nothing from me afterward. That realization nearly made me cry right there in the office. My mother still contacted me occasionally during those first months in Seattle. At first, the messages came constantly. Long emotional voicemails filled with tears and confusion. "I do not understand why you are punishing me. Families should not abandon each other. Your father barely speaks anymore." But I noticed something important over time. Without access to my daily life, her control weakened. Distance exposed her patterns more clearly. The guilt no longer wrapped itself around my thoughts the same way it once had. Eventually, the messages became less frequent, then shorter, then mostly silence. My father called once every few weeks. We spoke carefully now, quietly, like 2 people standing inside the ruins of something neither of us fully knew how to repair. One evening, about 6 months after I moved, he told me my mother started therapy. I stared out at the Seattle skyline through rain-streaked windows while processing that information silently. "Do you think she understands what she did?" I asked finally. My father hesitated for a long moment. "I think she understands you left." It was not the same thing. We both knew that. But strangely, I no longer needed her confession the way I once thought I did. Understanding her changed nothing about what happened. The damage already existed. The lost years already existed. The relationships she poisoned already existed. Some things cannot be repaired simply because the truth finally surfaces, but freedom can still exist afterward. That was the part one never understood before leaving Ohio. Healing did not arrive all at once like some dramatic movie scene. It arrived quietly, in tiny moments. Buying groceries without someone questioning every purchase. Applying for opportunities without fear. Sitting alone in my apartment at night and realizing nobody was secretly trying to shape my future behind closed doors anymore. Sometimes the grief still surprised me though. Certain things triggered it unexpectedly. Watching mothers and daughters laugh together at the farmer's market near Pike Place. Hearing coworkers casually mention supportive parents. Seeing old childhood photos while unpacking boxes. Because the hardest part was accepting that my mother probably did love me in the only way she understood how. It just was not healthy love. It was possession wrapped in tenderness. Fear disguised as protection. And once I understood that, something inside me finally stopped searching for